I'm honored to be here because of what you've been doing for so many years, so faithfully and so well. I'm absolutely honored to stand here where others have stood, supported by you and your ministries. I also need to tell you, though, that I'm glad to be here because Eloise has, she's kind of given the old heart some new fluttering over the last 3 or 4 years, because at my age, well, really, at any age, I've never been stalked before. And each year when that stalking call would come, the old man's heart just started fluttering. But as I told her, it's not because I'm that busy, it's just because with 10 grandkids, when you get early in June, you're usually stacked up. Last Sunday was number 6 of 10, so there are 4 more in the pipeline, but tonight I'm available. I'm going to ask for your indulgence in that often when preaching, I don't use notes. I do a lot of eyeball to eyeball, but confessedly, because of the moment in which we live, I didn't want to come and fire off the top. I've worked very hard on what I've brought to you. So if sometimes you see my bald head instead of my eyes, it's only because I want to give you everything I have to give. While serving in the Chicago area, it was my practice to arrive early for every preaching assignment. Now, in retrospect, I've come to realize that I was an early bird for at least 3 reasons. Obsessive compulsive. 2, I wanted to go to the pastor's study, look around to see if we had a live one appointed there. Thirdly, and most importantly, I wanted to arrive early in order to put a listening ear to the wall, in an attempt to hear either the demons moaning or the angels swooning. I say that because over the decades, I have become convinced that church institutions, like human beings, have souls, and that the relative health or lack thereof of a congregation or larger institution can be ascertained by attentive, intentional listening. So, given this avowed interest in institutional angels and demons, it is not difficult to understand my attraction to Walter Wink's book, The Powers That Be, Theology for a New Millennium. This short book, and it is short, is a provocative summation of Walter's earlier trilogy on the powers and principalities. In this short compendium are these arresting comments, and I'm quoting. Powers that be are more than just the people who run things. They are the systems themselves, the institutions and structures that weave society into an intricate fabric of power and relationships. These powers surround us on every side. They are necessary, they are useful, but the powers can also be the source of unmitigated evils. Continuing. The powers that be are not simply people and institutions. They also include the spirituality at the core of those institutions and structures. If we want to change those systems, we will have to address not only their outer forms, but their inner spirit as well. Third quote, the demonic is the spirituality produced when the angel of an institution turns its back on its divine vocation And if the demonic arises when an angel deviates from its calling, then social change does not depend on casting out the demons, but recalling its angel to its divine task. Wink affirms that systems and institutions are created good in order to accomplish their intended positive purpose. They are initially endowed with the angel of their intended nature. But over time, inevitably, they fall. Instead of continually embracing the angel of the power of love to accomplish their avowed purpose, they inevitably are seduced by the demon of the love of power, by which they increasingly serve themselves as the fallen angel of their lesser nature gains precedence. And yet, this is the good news, because of the wonder of the great mystery, which in the long run always bends toward fundamental goodness. That is, because of the Holy One, who makes a way out of no way, fallen institutions and systems, like broken individuals, can be redeemed. As a called partner, a co-creator in the sacred business of institutional renewal, the purpose of MFSA is to be an agent of change within the United Methodist Church for the redemption of the church and the transformation of the nation. This is no small calling for such a time as this. Therefore, what follows is a suggested framework with several specifics for your thoughtful and prayerful consideration as you continue to pursue your sacred calling. This offering, coming to you from the depth of my soul, is a rather elementary plea, and I own it as such, for the faithful to emulate Jesus in prison, with children, and in the face of systemic and seductive violence, in order to ferment an angelic vision through which to help call church and nation back to the good angels of their intended nature and purpose. The Jesus I know. Now, I may ruffle some feathers here, but I don't know how to speak unless I speak candidly. The Jesus I know, admittedly, but through a glass darkly, and emulate only in fits and starts. Jesus, the liberator, who called believers to follow him, thus prefiguring the early church, is not the only son of some all-powerful, all-knowing Big Daddy hovering up there somewhere in the great beyond. This Jesus is not some half-human, half-divine, surreal demigod who was sent from heaven above to die a bloody death on earth below in order to appease an angry father, atone for sin, and wipe the dirty slate clean. This popular, often taken for granted myth of redemptive violence, when carefully examined in juxtaposition with the recorded life and teachings of Jesus, is theologically nonsensical and ethically offensive. I cannot fathom the great mystery, intimately called Abba Father by Jesus, requiring an act of substitutionary atonement to wash away sin. Such gibberish not only sanctions violence, but posits a God out of sync with the Jesus who preached the Sermon on the Mount, taught and lived the Beatitudes, befriended outcasts, ate with sinners, and so trusted the grace and hope found in the great mystery that he resisted evil nonviolently, even to the cross, and was raised anew, thus inaugurating a new age, both present and coming, in which unconditional love, forgiveness, reconciliation, justice doing, and blessed shalom, salam, are identified and celebrated as the essence of the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. In this reign, the church is called to be the modeler. The faithful followers of Jesus, bound together by baptism as the beloved community, are mandated. We are mandated. It's not either maybe, it's mandated to sight, sound, signal, and symbolize the way of Jesus through our relationship with the great mystery, our treatment of one another, and what we do on behalf of others in the world. Early in the 13th century, 1205 of the Common Era to be exact, Giovanni di Bernardone rode his unusually tall horse toward the Lazaretto, the isolated ghetto located on the edge of the village where he lived. This condemned space housed the community's feared and therefore despised lepers. As he approached, Giovanni heard the strident clicking sound of the noisemakers. Lepers were forced to carry and shake in order to broadcast an insistent warning announcing their unclean presence, lest the clean be made dirty by mere association, let alone with human contact. In his past, the sight and sound of these outcasts had prompted this haughty dandy to nudge his great horse to turn from the Lazaretto, to retreat from its much maligned inhabitants. Somewhat obsessively, he had sought to escape from the lepers, but this time he could not. He could no longer flee the Lazaretto's occupant. Some irresistible mystical force had taken hold of Giovanni di Bernardone. Thus, instead of galloping away, he reined in his tall steed and dismounted. Can't you see him? That is to say, he literally got off of his high horse, entered the Lazaretto to embrace a particular leper whose tortured face, had penetrated his heart. Church historians record that when Giovanni di Bernardone got off of his high horse, entered the Lazaretto, and kindly embraced that leper, that redemption occurred, and Giovanni became St. Francis of Assisi, and the church and the nation have never been the same. Now, I retell this familiar story because of an unshakable conviction that the redemption of the United Methodist Church, with its current slogans, pathways, and fixation on survival, and the transformation of this nation, with its violence embracing militarism, political divisiveness, and chauvinistic imperialism, will not occur unless and until would-be change agents and other leaders in these less than angelic systems and institutions get off of our high horses and embrace up close and personal the lives and situations of those most adversely affected by the present demonic proclivities of both church and state. We simply, friends, we simply must embrace today's supposed lepers. Embrace them as part of God's family. Supposed lepers, like inmates incarcerated in the new Jim Crow lazarettos in this nation, a nation which imprisons the highest percentage of its citizenry of any industrialized nation on the planet. Supposed lepers, like children, molested by a cruelly virulent culture in which 1 in 5 children in this nation lives in poverty. 50% of our children, of our precious children, cannot read or compute at grade levels 4, 8, and 12. 1 in 3 black boys, 1 in 6 brown boys, 1 in 13 white boys who cannot read at grade level by grade 3 are already in the pipeline to prison. Supposed lepers, like the victims of the seductive power of systemic violence in this nation, in which hear this number, in which 166,000 children and youth have died from guns on American soil since 1963. That's 3 times the combined numbers of all the U.S. soldiers killed in the Vietnam, Iraqi, and Afghani wars. It will be by embracing, dear friends, such supposed lepers as these, our sisters and brothers, closeted in their violent lazarettos, that we will meet Jesus Victor and experience anew, I do believe, the great mystery in which the good angels of authentic church purpose and national destiny are rediscovered. It is only by establishing an I-thou relationship with today's supposed lepers that we will rediscover the angel of our better nature, both personally and collectively. Now, hear Walter Wink again, and then consider with me several very concrete examples. Walter said, the demonic is the spirituality produced when the angel of an institution turns its back on its divine vocation. If the demonic arises when an angel deviates from its calling, then social change does not depend on casting out the demon, but recalling the angel to its divine task. For 13 years in Central Ohio, several hundred laymen from religious communities, mostly churches, but also synagogues and mosques, have been going to prison every Tuesday evening for 10 months on end. Come hell or high water, they go to serve as outside brothers with inmates. There's no programmed agenda. The only expectation is that each outside brother be a trustworthy friend to the insider. Now, some of the one-on-one pairings between the innies and the outies in that crowded lazaretto are as counterintuitive as Giovanni embracing the leper. Young, old, black, white, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever, rural, urban, liberal, conservative, the differences are very, very real. Yet over time, over the course of those months, such artificial cultural lines of demarcation fade. Common humanity and inclusive community become experienced reality, and miraculous transformations occur. Inside brothers, most of whom have never had a non-exploitive, non-manipulative, non-abusive relationship with another man, grow in trust and bask in the liberating joy of sacred space where hostility becomes hospitality and trauma transformed brokers the courage for them to become more than anyone, most particularly they themselves, ever dreamed possible. Outside brothers, often bored by the humdrum rhythms of their pedestaled and privileged lives, and almost always fearful of entering the lazaretto to face the purported lepers caged there, quickly come to see them as sacred thou. Supposed leprous objects become highly valued subjects as outside brothers experience the miracle of redemption by getting off of their high horses and embracing the inside brother. And these redeemed outside brothers and the congregations of which they are a part are utterly transformed, never to be quite the same again. Contemplate, friends, what would happen if the United Methodist Church, which talks incessantly about ministry with the poor and making disciples for the transformation of the world, would do less pontificating from lofty perches, that is to say, got off of our ecclesiastical high horse to make a disciplined, concerted effort to enter the lazaretto of incarnation, our nation's human junkyard, to serve as a pastoral presence and prophetic change agents on behalf of the 2.5 million Americans who have been dumped there like human garbage. If we were to come to know the inmates up close and personal, perhaps, just perhaps, the United Methodist Church, true to its Wesleyan angel of its intended purpose, might be empowered to goad and help guide this nation to forsake the current folly of spending more money per year. It's $25,000 a head for each inmate in Ohio to imprison a supposed leper than would be needed to educate and rehabilitate a human being for an honored place at the table. If, Walter Wink said, we want to change those systems, we will have to address not only their outer forms, but their inner spirit as well. Influenced by persuasive data that identify the ability to read at an early age as a prerequisite for children to escape the pipeline to prison and lay claim to the dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the Children's Defense Fund, courageously and brilliantly led by Marian Wright Edelman, a few years ago began to reestablish freedom schools around this nation. Once a training, some of you may remember this, freedom schools, once an academy for the training of young, very young civil rights activists. Now these schools, some operating year-round, most during the summer months, employ indigenous from the neighborhood, well-trained at the Haley Farm in Tennessee, college students as servant leaders and mentors, provide each young scholar with exceptional, contextually relevant books, not only to read, but to take home to start a library, while also modeling and teaching personal family, community, and national respect and responsibility. The results from these innovative schools are statistically and experientially amazing. Elementary age scholars advance exponentially in reading comprehension. Young adult servant leaders begin to discover a vocational calling. And sponsoring institutions absolutely delight in at last establishing a network with others that makes a profound difference, and a lasting one at that. 3 years ago, a fledgling Shalom Zone in Columbus, Ohio, organized in a very, very tough neighborhood, was invited by the Children's Defense Fund to sponsor a freedom school. With 6 youth gangs controlling the neighborhood, less than a 50% graduation rate from the 2 public high schools, an inordinately high social index for violence, and a well-researched community outcry for the provision of out-of-school programs for children and youth. This Shalom Zone's leadership knew that it was time to stand up or shut up. It was do or die time. Thus, quite literally, with no money, I'm talking no money in hand, this United Methodist Church-led network of the sacred and secular, the private and public partners who had gathered, not only said, yes, we'll do it, but tacked on, we won't do 1, we'll do 3, and we will serve 150 children this summer. And the zone, as it came to be called, did just that. As the public school system opened 3 buildings and provided experienced staff free of charge. County Mental Health Board, for the first time, tried to do something creative rather than reactive and gave startup money. First, a small Lutheran college, and then the social work department of a large state university joined the effort with expertise and personnel. Diverse congregations, the local YMCA and library, police, some of us from the 60s, this is a stretch for us, police, hear this now, police and firemen and firewomen are there now. Service clubs and community organizations and innumerable neighborhood residents joined in an energized adventure of dismounting their separate high horses and entering together like a posse, the lazaretto, where children, too often abused by violence and molested by neglect, yearn for hope. The good news gets even better. This summer, 3 years later, right now, tonight, the Zone, in league with the Children's Defense Fund, has spawned 12 freedom schools across central Ohio, 4 of its own in which more than 200 children will be served in coming weeks. Across Ohio, there will be 22 of these Children's Defense-led freedom schools this summer. They will serve 1,300 children, 95% of whom must be very, very poor. They'll be led by 132 indigenous young adults, each of whom will receive a $2,700 stipend to help defray college costs in the coming year. Thankfully, now hear this, thankfully, United Methodist congregations are at the heart of half of these freedom schools in Ohio. All of this fundamental goodness because a half dozen small, struggling, urban United Methodist congregations, you know the kind, dared to forego the luxury of separate ways when a common path was opened before them. They discovered the angel of their better nature by getting off of their historic high horses of congregational defeatism, of the old chant, we never did it that way, and of the parochial vanity of going it alone. Better to die alone than join the others for the victory. They got rid of that. Walter's right on. Change does not depend on casting out the demon, but recalling its angel to its divine task. Contemplate with me. What would happen? What would happen if the United Methodist Church committed, not talked about it, but committed to organize Shalom Zone-like networks to sponsor freedom schools or similar programs in every rural and urban community where we have congregations. Maybe getting up close and personal with forgotten and forsaken precious little ones who dwell in the troubled lazarettos all around us. We would help to make such a difference in their lives. They would come to trust us and would so want a piece of what we offer that just maybe our Sunday schools would once again be teeming with children and youth yearning for the old story of Jesus' active, transforming love. And perhaps by such an example, maybe a moribund Congress and the far too cautious Obama administration would be influenced, even pressured, by such an authentic, vulnerable example to get off of their lame high horses, quit fighting across party lines, and instead of castigating, we love to castigate them, do we not? Instead of castigating those floundering and drowning in the turbulent river of woe, dare to take gutsy, creative action to keep the precious children from being thrown into the turbulence of benign neglect and malignant indifference in the first place. My mother, long since deceased, uttered many folksy truisms. One of them was, "Joe, remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." The Zone has a vibrant teen center. It's located in what only recently was a nearly empty United Methodist Church. It sponsors an after-school athletic program, again, led by off-duty policemen and fire personnel. It's brought healthcare resources to a forgotten neighborhood. It pushes adult literacy programs and arranges legal help, both especially for immigrant persons. Trains youth from the high schools in peer mediation, has a free store, features intern programs and vital partnerships with local schools, colleges, and particularly the YMCA, all made possible by a very competitive 21st Century Learning Grant. And only recently, in the last 6 months, it has established a cutting-edge mediation center where professionally trained volunteers help neighborhood residents, those most prone to violence, to discover non-violent ways to settle disputes. Now, considering, and I'm going to hasten to conclude, considering this vast menu of media offerings, all made possible on a financial shoestring, contemplate what might happen if dismounting high horses of privilege and pretense in order to enter the lazaretto of neglect, church leaders and congregational members took to heart the witness of youngsters, of children, like the 14-year-old who recently broke into the Zone's youth center. When she was caught, tearfully she said, "I apologize. I knew it wasn't time, but I had to go to the only safe place I knew for my baby and myself." Contemplate what would happen. What would happen to the United Methodist Church if we witnessed black, brown, and white boys in the lazaretto struggling to understand and accept each other under the tutelage of friendly cops? Better that than wasting each other on the mean streets. Perhaps no longer on high horses, but down and dirty, tenderly embracing these precious youth and children as our own, we would discover anew the angel of the UMC's intended nature And maybe, I'm not sure about this, but I want to put it out there as a hope, maybe find again the prophetic courage among us to say with unified connectional strength to the NRA, Congress, and the Obama administration, the crucial issue stalking this nation is not protecting the Second Amendment, assuring your re-election, or generating profit from gun and ammunition sales. But instead, the stalking horse issue is protecting the precious lives of children and youth who already have ready access to guns and are being subliminally taught daily that it is acceptable to maim and kill in a nation that promiscuously celebrates and practices violence, not only by failing to control the sale and possession of lethal weapons, but by wasting some $6 trillion now to kill and maim in Afghanistan and Iraq, including with smart bombs and drones that are destroying innocent lives indiscriminately. Is the horse on which this nation is perched so high and mighty that we cannot realize that to sow the seed of violence is to reap the whirlwind of wanton slaughter and blatant terrorism? Final word from Walter, and then some summarizing comments. Powers that be are not simply people and institutions. They also include the spirituality at the core of those institutions. If we want to change the systems, we will have to change not only the outer form, but their inner spirit as well. Therefore, 3 therefores, and then I'll sit down. Therefore, because Jesus said, come inherit the kingdom. I was in prison, and you visited me. It is far more important, friends, to seek the angel of the church's better nature in prison than to endlessly fashion growth strategies in the Council of Bishops or fuss with the latest edicts of IRD and Good News. Recall with me the miracle of witnessing the former head of the Aryan Brotherhood in all of the prisons in Ohio. You know what an Aryan brother is. Standing in the lazaretto of incarceration, side by side with a black Muslim, formerly enraged militant, arm in arm, saying to those gathered, inmates and outmates, no one is going to harm this brother, this one whom I used to plot to kill. He is my brother. He is my Muslim brother. Because Jesus is in my heart, anyone who wants to get to him has to come through me. Let us forego the luxury of passive church play, endless processing, divisive bickering, and instead devote our energy, our time, our talent, our sacred energy to entering the lazaretto, there to hear the angel swooning. Friends, if Christian and Muslim, think of this, white, brown, and black men can become family in prison, live together with no bars separating them, can it not be so in church and world? If those with ears to hear will get off of our high horses, rediscover the good angel of our denomination's intended nature, and dare to incarnate the old story of Jesus and his active, unconditional, barrier-breaking love. Second, because Jesus taught Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will see God. And you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I, this guy right here, I no longer have any interest in debating which immoral war is just. I don't have time for that nonsense. At such a time as this, when children and other civilians are being killed indiscriminately, the just war theory is outdated and oxymoronic. Personally, I had, and I'm a kind of head guy, personally, I had to get off of my rationally attuned theological high horse in order to enter the lazaretto, where war has done its demonic evil and unspeakable violence. It was there. It was there. In that orphanage in Kabul City, that little Islamic 10-year-old, that little boy found me and grabbed my hand. And while we held hands tearfully, he drew for me his remembrance of seeing the U.S. bombs fall on the farmhouse that housed his parents and his siblings, and his drawing also showed the body parts of all the farm animals. It was in such a lazaretto that I stood beside the Mexican-American woman whose brother had been assassinated in the Chicago barrio because he had demonstrated the audacity to drive out the pimps and the pushers. She is Emma, my honored and beloved sister, who has organized her community politically, with her Anglo husband, founded a dynamic immigrant UMC congregation, and is a radical, no-nonsense advocate for systemic immigration reform in this nation. It was in the killing field, lazaretto in Cambodia, where the little lay preacher, 18, 19 years of age, took me, with the bones protruding in the field, where we saw 5,290 human skulls stacked on top of one another as a memorial to the atrocity of war. It was there that, with voice shaking, he said, I confess to you, Bishop, that I still am enraged at those genocidal murderers who killed my parents and my siblings, whose bones are here somewhere. But I can't give in to that. For you see, I accepted Jesus as my Savior. He is in my heart, and I have to live, and I'll die nonviolently. In the lazaretto, while tenderly embracing the victims of violence and war, who are sisters and brothers, there, I do believe, because I've experienced it, that we will hear the good angel of the church's purpose swooning, and possibly there, together, it has to be together, we will regain the courage with one voice to say to the nation, the Holy One shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. We shall beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. Nation, including this one, shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall we learn war anymore. It's amazing how we're literalists with some texts, but we forget others. Because Jesus said, and this is it, because Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs. Freedom schools and political advocacy to help curtail further cuts have claimed me. They are far more important to this bishop than riding a tall Episcopal horse to church gathering after costly, usually inconsequential church conclave. Envision with me then the young teen whose adoptive mother was on her way to jail for drug use and violence. Abdominal surgery was scheduled that day on his body, that afternoon. But that morning he stood at the door of the Freedom School. When asked why he wasn't home resting, he said, "I can't be. I can rest later. I love Freedom School. I'm learning something here. And hear me, I'm going to come back someday and be a servant leader too, to give to kids what those young adults have given to me." Here, and this is a direct quote from a piece he just wrote. Here, African-American police officer, City Police, Columbus, Ohio, Gregory by name, a mentor in one of the zone's freedom schools, a soon-to-be father. His first child is coming. Here's what he wrote. When I place black boys under arrest, I wish they had the right to remain free. Anything they say not used against them in courts of law. They do not possess the right to have justice. They can't afford it. The angels of the church's better nature and of this nation's stated destiny are no longer swooning. This is the bad news. They're no longer swooning in the cacophonous noise of solemn assemblies, but rather they can be heard in lazarettos of need and possibility, where God's precious subjects are crying out, desperately yearning to experience the justice and joy of the kingdom. MFSers, MFSAers, whoever you are, dismount with me, dismount. Get off of your high horse in order to embrace supposed lepers, that by so emulating the activist Jesus in prison with children and in the face of violence, you just might, we just might, help to ferment an angelic vision within the United Methodist Church for the transformation of this nation. And believe me, you cannot be or do much better than that. Soon, and very soon, let it be.